start to turn it around.
If we all could love one another, all the world could be as one. Just take time to love one another, all the world could be as one. Black man, white man, standing together, no more fighting to be done. Yellow, red man, dancing together, all the world could be as one.
And welcome to Heal DC. This is Joni Eisenberg. It is December 18th, 2023. This is our last show for this year. We'll be back on in January. But as we end this year, we are still horrifically looking at an ongoing genocide. We're going to be spending the hour talking about how do we expanding strategies for immediate ceasefire. We have three wonderful guests who will be joining us. Of course, we are proud of the organizing and resistance that has been taking place around Gaza since October 7th, but we need to do a lot more. And we'll be looking at effective strategies from the present and lessons from our past histories. We'll be approaching it from different perspectives, including strategies around civil disobedience and protests, labor, the labor movement, what the labor movement can contribute to expanding this resistance, and also the faith community, faith strategies. We'll be hearing from Pastor William Young in our second portion of the program. But right now, I am excited and thrilled to introduce our two guests for this half hour. First of all, Ashley Lewis will be with us for the entire hour, and she is from Detroit with the United Auto Workers Women's Department, and we'll be sharing with us, of course, what UAW has done recently to contribute to the efforts to stop this genocide. And then we're going to be speaking with, I'll call her a rock star in the movement. She might not like that title, but she has been active for a half century as a activist for justice in many arenas, including anti-war, fighting against she was actually the interim director of Pacifica Radio in the late 90s, an organizer of a major demonstration against nuclear energy in New York City, co-coordinator of the People's Climate March in 2014, and much, much more. So we will be talking to Leslie Cagan in a few moments. So welcome, Leslie, and welcome, Ashley. Ashley, we're going to start with you. First of all, for listeners who may not know, tell us about the historic victory that the United Auto Workers had this fall, and then the historic vote that you took for UAW to stand up and help to demand a ceasefire now. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you, Joni. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Lewis, and I bring greetings on behalf of Secretary Treasurer Margaret Mott. And I will start by highlighting the overall victories that came not only for the big three, but also for Blue Cross Blue Shield workers. And what we saw was a huge increase in terms of wages for workers, but also a huge increase in terms of eliminating the separation that existed as a result of the bankruptcy. And so this has really been a full circle moment of making sure that our members are made whole, while also centering on the transition into electrification. And in terms of Blue Cross Blue Shield workers, who actually have a predominance of women there, and we featured actually the women negotiators there. They were able to actually cut down the time that I think they had a 22-year wage progression. And now through this contractual campaign, they were on strike for 88 days. And they were able to eliminate the tier after 5 years, which is a huge win in one contract cycle for those that are familiar with negotiations and contractual language. So that we're coming off of a huge win there, but we're not only just fighting for justice in the workplace, we're also fighting for justice globally. We've always fought for that. And the UAW is one of the first major unions to actually sign on to this ceasefire. The entire International Executive Board did so. And they are really calling for 4 key elements, which is that the basic rights of people be restored, the Israeli hostages taken by Hamas, that they be immediately released. And we have seen some progression in that, but obviously things broke down there. But there must be a ceasefire in Gaza, and that they are also calling on the U.S. to act and calling on President Biden to immediately call for a ceasefire.
Absolutely. And listeners, we must say that UAW actually represents close to 1 million workers. I think it's 400,000 active workers and maybe more than 500,000 retired employees. So this is 1 million workers that are standing up to say ceasefire in Gaza. And we'll be talking to Ashley again in a few minutes and through the hour to discuss how UAW can play a role to, and is playing a role to, expand labor's standing up and saying no to this genocide. So we're very happy to have you on again. Ashley, you were with us in the fall, and you will hopefully be with us again. Now let's move to Leslie Cagan. Some of you may know of Leslie. Again, she's really dedicated herself for at least a half a century in many different struggles. I remember Leslie in being involved with the national mobilization to end the war in Vietnam. And I read that she was an activist in New York City with a peace movement, organized 21 buses from New York to come to the March on the Pentagon in 1967. Again, she was the interim director of Pacifica Radio in the 90s, late 90s. She in 1982, and I remember this, she was there was a huge nuclear disarmament demonstration in New York City's Central Park, probably one of the biggest nuclear disarmament demonstration ever. She was the organizer of that. And I'm proud to say my whole family attended that. She was the co-coordinator of the massive 2014 People's Climate March, where over 400,000 people came, and we certainly covered that on PFW and Pacifica, and much, much more. And I'll say we will have Leslie. We hope to have Leslie back for the hour next year, as well as Leslie. But today we're focusing on how do we strengthen the movement to stop the genocide in Gaza. Leslie gave a very good example. I think it was only a week ago, Leslie, that she seems like a long time ago already, but a week ago, probably right as we are speaking, Leslie was among what they're calling us as elders of Jewish Voice for Peace, who chained themselves to the White House fence in protest of the genocide in Gaza. So maybe, Leslie, perhaps we could start with that and then keep on going.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. And I'm really happy to be here with Ashley. Good work. These great victories. One thing I must clarify, though, I was not the interim director of Pacifica. I was the interim board chair.
Okay, that makes sense.
I know the Pacifica Networks people are very precise about these things.
I know it's somehow, I didn't think you were, but I was reading what I read. But
Right,
yes,
right.
anyway, you've been part of Pacifica for sure.
Yes. Thank you. So anyway, yes, last week, 18 of us, as Joni said, elder. It's a whole new category for me. But elder women, Jewish women, chained ourselves to the fence on Pennsylvania Avenue. That side of the White House. And we did it to as another way of saying how committed we are. And it's not just 18 people who are committed to this struggle. It is, I mean, we don't even know. It is millions and millions of people, certainly here in this country and literally in every corner of the planet. People are crying out for an end to this all out assault. I can't even find the words to describe the horror of what is going on in Gaza right now. So we wanted to add another statement to that literally worldwide effort to stop this insanity. And we chained ourselves to the fence. We knew we were risking arrest. But I must say, when we were arrested, it was the easiest, calmest arrest I have ever seen or been part of. And I think that it's something to do with us being older white women. You know, police don't always handle arrests with such a gentle touch as they did that day. So we understand our privilege in a way. And we want to use that as a tool to say again that it's not only young people, it's not only people who have quote, anti-Semitic feelings or attitudes, and well, honestly, there are people who are anti-Semitic. But what we're saying is that being critical of the Israeli government is not anti-Semitism. Being critical of Zionism is not anti-Semitism. So as elder white Jewish women, we were able to carve out a little space in this action to make that statement. What we know in this struggle and what we know from history is no one action changes policy. It is the cumulative effect of literally millions of people in motion doing whatever they can, whether it's calling on their senator or house member, whether it's writing a letter to the editor, whether it's a mass march, whether it's a picket line, whether it's chaining yourself to the fence of the White House, it all adds up. And that's the most critical thing that I've learned over time, over, as you said, Joni, many decades now of organizing, that there's no one tactic that gets the results we want. And particularly when we're up against forces as powerful as the Israeli government and the U.S. government.
Absolutely.
We've got to be creative and we've got to be expansive in terms of the tactics that we offer people and the tools that we give people to do this work as part of a movement. Here's the bottom line. We are not alone. Right? We are not alone in this struggle. Everybody has a place and everyone is welcome.
Absolutely. And Leslie, I wish we had the whole day with you and you and Ashley, but we have a few minutes. If you could perhaps think of a few, and we know that the organizers and the activists and the regular people are out there, and we're all doing as best that we can. I know I can't make all the demonstrations, but we still do what we can. What would be some of your suggestions for what can be done now in the next few weeks or the next month to strengthen the movement and expand the movement? And
Right.
I think I was going to ask you one thing, but tell us what you would
Sure.
suggest.
Sure. I think that making consciously reaching out, making connections with other people fighting other struggles too. So, for instance, the UAW has given us a tremendous victory by coming out as the country's largest major labor union in the call for a ceasefire. So take that information, go to the locals, go to union locals in your area, go to any connection you have to people in the labor movement and say, if the UAW can do this, how about our local doing it? How about our regional configuration doing it? And build on those connections. Don't be shy. People, you may not know somebody, but you can still knock on a door. You can still make a phone call, reach out to people. Because we know the sentiment in this country is for a ceasefire. What we want to do is turn the sentiment into greater action. And we have to call on people and energize people to join us in that. I also think that we need to not be afraid of taking bold and creative actions. Even if we've never done them before, even if we don't know exactly how they might turn out, the seriousness of this moment and the urgency of this moment kind of demands of us to, yes, offer people a range of tactics, and at the same time, be thinking about new things that we can do that shine a light on the problem. And included in that is, how do we put pressure, keep the pressure on Congress and the White House? This country, the United States of America, and our government has for decades, and even more so now, given literally billions of dollars to the Israeli government for arms. Of course, the irony is we don't actually, what actually happens is our government says to the Israeli government, we will give you $10 billion for arms, but that money has to be spent here in this country. Your arms have to be purchased from U.S. arms manufacturers. We need to break that cycle. So we need to really put pressure on the White House and Congress. And I know a lot of people are doing that, but we need to keep ramping that up. The other arena of work that I think we need to strengthen is in the media. We need to be able to inject, and it comes through in spurts and at moments, but we need to inject a steady stream of a different narrative here. Right, that the people of this country, including many people in the Jewish community, but people in this country are in clear opposition to the U.S. government's support of what Israel and its arms and its army are doing in Gaza. We demand not only that Biden call for a ceasefire, but he actually takes steps to make sure a ceasefire can happen by telling Netanyahu that we will stop the flow of arms and money to Israel. That's a power that no one but the United States president has. He needs to use that power that he was elected to use in that kind of creative and bold way, which means we have to be creative and bold.
Absolutely. We're talking with Leslie Cagan, lifelong activist for many, many causes, including peace. We're proud to be having her with us today. And Leslie, I'm thinking, and a few weeks ago we did a in-depth discussion of the Montgomery bus boycott and the lessons from that boycott. Certainly one of the lessons, the boycott, which lasted 381 days, is that it wasn't just one person, Rosa Parks, sitting down, but it took a lot of organizing, handing out leaflets and just the mundane things like that. What it seems to me that it's amazing that we have these demonstrations and we get maybe a day's notice of some of them, if that. But sometimes I wish we could go back to some of the old ways of really handing out leaflets, going into communities, and especially here in DC. What suggestions do you have for immediately strengthening our organizing capacity?
Right. Well, let me say, I think we have to do several things at once. Not any one individual, one group, but as a movement. We need to use the social media and the new technologies that are available to help get the word out. And we need to do some of the tried and true tactics of organizing. There is nothing quite like human beings actually talking to each other. I'm sure Ashley is in the working movement. There's nothing that beats that. So social media is all great, but we have to talk to each other. That means in community centers, at workplaces, in schools, in religious institutions, wherever we are, we need to say, will you join this demonstration? Will you sign on to a letter to our member of the House of Representatives? Will you call your elected officials? Will you, this organization that you're part of, make a public statement? And join the other many organizations that are speaking out and calling for a ceasefire. So wherever you are, there are people in your life. Talk to them, raise it. And some people may say, don't bother me. Okay, so don't bother them. But many people will respond positively. They'll be happy to be given some vehicle to express themselves on this issue. So start where you are. You don't have to think about a big citywide effort. Think about your community, your workplace, like I said, your religious institution, where you go to school, where you interact with people. And start there and build from there, and then find other groups in your city, in your state, and hook up with them, make those connections. The problem is that, or the reality is that we don't have a lot of time here, right? There is an urgency to this situation. I don't know where, once the fighting is over, and it will end at some point, I don't know where 2 million Gazan people are going to live, right? Their neighborhoods, their homes, their livelihoods, their schools, their hospitals, their churches and mosques have been destroyed. So this is a long-term battle to regain that dignity that people must have, and a place to live is part of that. But at the same time, there is an urgency. Right now, bombs are dropping on the people of Gaza. And let me be clear, I, like many, I think everybody I know who's involved in this, am super critical of Hamas and the outrageous assault on October 7th. It was horrendous what they did. That does not mean that the Israeli government has the right to completely obliterate a population of 2 million people, right? There are other ways to seek justice. And so we can be critical of Hamas and at the same time be critical and be taking action to stop the assault, the all-out, the ethnic cleansing, I don't know what else to call it, that is going on in Gaza right now.
Yes, a genocide, of course.
Yeah.
And we're going to, Leslie is here with us for a few more minutes, but before she leaves, Ashley, did you want to chime in before we move to another segment about what labor can do, what UAW can do in terms of just talking to everyday people and organizing the old-fashioned way?
So what I would say is that labor is an organizing machine, and always been able to connect despite differences, and understood that community is powerful only when we come together for a collective rationale or reason. And in this case, it is important and has been a pivotal moment for us to take stance on the ceasefire. And sometimes I think we don't hit home enough with statistics. 70% of the dead are women and children. 70% of the dead are women and children. And so when the powers that be decide to go to war, they're not considered. And this whole ceasefire is centering on those who are marginalized and oppressed, who pay the price for the decisions of the powers that be. because we know that their children are living in ivory towers while the citizens on both sides are being harmed in this whole situation. And so I think centering by humanizing the whole event so that people can connect to it is key when you're actually organizing, and also building the bridges. We talked about the bus boycott, but there was fish fries, there was all types of things that they did in order to actually build the money that was needed to have the gas to be able to transfer
Absolutely.
the workers, right, the domestic workers to their jobs, right, to keep the movement going while still boycotting. And even as we look at the March on Washington, there was a huge push to get buses, people providing buses. And so part of this organizing is going to also have a conversation that centers around resources, and also giving people an immediate way to act. For example, we have a petition that the UAW has signed on. That's an immediate thing that members can do, right? That even beyond our members, our communities, these are things, if you walk around with a QR code, it's an immediate ask and an immediate action. But it lets people tap into the movement, because a lot of people don't really understand it all, but they don't want to see people hurt or harmed. And so I agree with you. It is the conversation in the grocery line, but sometimes it's just having that QR code. So, technology has its pros and cons, but our movement has shifted a bit, and it has given us a greater opportunity to act.
Okay, we're just listening to Ashley Lewis, calling in from Detroit with the United Auto Workers Women's Department. And in a moment, we're going to move into a discussion with Pastor William Young from Covenant Baptist Church. But we want to say thank you to Leslie Cagan, calling from New York City, an activist for peace and much, much more, for a half century. We both have the same hometown, New York City. So Leslie.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Joni, for putting this program together, for your years of putting excellent programs together, and I'm sure you'll continue to do that. And thank you for allowing me to share this time with Ashley. It's a great pleasure to meet you, Ashley, and congratulations again to all the victories of the UAW. Great work.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm very proud too. Leslie, I'm going to talk to you off air. I realize we have more in common than I even knew. Okay, we're talking. Thank you, Leslie, and we'll be in touch. We are talking this hour. This is our last show for 2023, about expanding the strategies for immediate ceasefire. As we just mentioned, we're talking with Ashley Lewis, and this is me, Joni Eisenberg, on WPFW 89.3 FM, and we are glad to welcome a member of the faith community, Pastor William Young, who has been the pastor at Covenant Baptist Church since 2019, I believe it has been. And before we welcome him, I also want to thank our own Reverend Graylin Hagler, who is with us always. Definitely very involved, of course, with peace and justice and Palestine, and has organized a group of ministers, which he calls Faith Strategies. And Graylin, as I asked him, who should we have on Monday? And he immediately said, William Young. So welcome, Pastor Young. Glad you could be with us. And perhaps give us a little bit more of an introduction of yourself. I think you were raised in Cincinnati, born in Louisville, have been many places all over the world, have been mentored by Reverend Shuttlesworth back in the day, and now you're here. So before we jump into the issue, anything else you'd like to share about who you are, Pastor William Young?
Well, first of all, thank you, Joni. I met you back in June at a demonstration. So it's I feel like I've arrived in DC now, getting a part of this radio show that I've heard so much about. But before I became pastor of Covenant here in DC, I lived for about 17 years in the United Kingdom. And that's where my earnest activism and solidarity with Palestine began as a pastor in Edinburgh, Scotland, and it has continued to this day. And actually, I was elected pastor in 2019 and just started my work with Covenant during the pandemic. And I couldn't move. I could not move to DC until a little over a year later. But for 2 years or so, we did all our meetings and worship services through Zoom, and so since we've been back in the building and able to move around, it's been gradual and slow to actually meet my parishioners. Because of the pandemic, but so far so good, and I'm enjoying myself with them. A lovely, incredible congregation there on the east of the river.
Yes.
Ward 8, affirming and welcoming.
And I understand. Yes, and I understand you also a jazz and blues singer.
That's
and,
right.
Aaron Myers
as well.
Aaron,
Singing the chorus at the moment.
Oh, great. And I heard you mention Scotland, and that made me think of Paul Robeson. I'm not sure.
Oh, yes. A lot of great memories people still had actually of Paul Robeson encounters with people that I've had who
wow.
remember those days.
Wow, that's something. So tell us briefly, I know this is a tough question, and we're going to get into another question in a moment, but what, as we know, we are proud of the resistance against this genocide that's taking place in the United States and around the world, and right here in Washington, D.C., and people are doing a lot to stop the genocide. But of course, we still have a lot more to do. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions about what we should do or try to do in the immediate future to expand and strengthen the movement to stop the genocide?
Well, from my perspective as a pastor, faith leader, I think it really begins with the faith community. Our sisters earlier were talking about changing the narrative of our relationship with Israel. And that's such a crucial issue. And it begins with us changing our language in the church, changing our language in other faith communities, but particularly in the church, of what we see as being what biblical and prophetic versus what is the real tragedy in this issue of politicians abusing really theology and using theology to justify what you have called quite rightly genocide. And I serve as a board member of Churches for Middle East Peace, which is an organization represented by 34 now denominations throughout the U.S. And we have been quite busy. We're always busy, even during peacetime, working on advocacy measures and education to the Christian community about Palestine and about other Middle East issues. But of course, since October 7th, we've been squarely focused on the war, and so we've tried to use our contacts and our and our ability to go into Congress as well as other global leaders, diplomats, to speak and to try to build coalitions to convince our government and the other 10 governments, the other 10 nations that have vetoed a ceasefire, to change course. With Churches for Middle East Peace, we've been, from the beginning of the war, we've been making public statements that all can be accessed through our website, but condemning the violence that initially started this war, but also acknowledging the historical conditions. Again, as our sisters have spoken so eloquently earlier, the historical conditions which have brought along this violence. And calling on the government to condemn. At first, we were speaking of condemning the disproportionate violent response by the state of Israel. Our most recent statements call for an immediate ceasefire.
Absolutely.
And sustainable justice for the Palestinian people. Our most recent statement last week denounces that the U.S. vetoing the ceasefire, while the rest of primarily the rest of the nations of the world have come together for a ceasefire.
Yes.
We've done so many other things. We've led the way in asking other religious leaders from throughout the world, about 68 bishops and executive leaders from churches around the world, to make a public statement, which was done a few weeks ago. And calling for an end to the bombing and a ground invasion of Gaza. As I said, we've held weekly briefings with foreign diplomats and the United Nations. We've also been able to have briefings with White House staff. Been able to express our disappointment to them, to national security staff and Oval Office staff, and the disappointment that some religious groups have been ignored, like CMEP, like Churches for Middle East Peace, while others have been given an audience to the president. When we address them, their responses to us have been woefully inadequate. To suggest that they would do anything at the moment to change their mind.
No.
So that's an ongoing issue.
Yes, it's an ongoing struggle. And let me just remind people, you're listening to Pastor William Young from Covenant Baptist Church. This is his first time on this show, recommended by our own Graylin Hagler. We're very proud to have you on, Pastor Young, today. And we're going to be running out of time soon, but I want to squeeze in one more question for you. As we on this show and on PFW, we always look back to history. How can history direct us now? And as we mentioned before, we've been talking on this show at an in-depth hour on the Montgomery bus boycott, which actually started December 5th with 40,000 residents of Black residents of Montgomery, Alabama, not getting on the bus. And it lasted for 181 days, ending December 20th. So that date is coming up. But so we need to learn from that successful boycott. What many people do not know is that Rosa Parks worked with somebody who happened to be a leader in the Pullman Porter movement. The Pullman porters have been critically important all of the last century for organizing, helping to organize the civil rights movement, and much, much more. And Pastor Young is going to tell us about a wonderful film and a wonderful actor that just became an ancestor this past weekend.
Yeah, well, at first I thought you were gonna, that was a segue to talking about, the BDS movement.
Oh, yes, we need to talk about that too.
Which is something that, many organizations are kind of antsy about, the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. While others have taken that movement on, but it's still something that I've suggested to a group of faith leaders for Ceasefire. We about 900 Black pastors and scholars and leaders signed a statement that made it to the New York Times, full page of the New York Times a few weeks ago. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting, a gathering, and I suggested, because it was suggested that if we're going to do anything in terms of a strategy moving forward in this movement, it must hit people at their pocketbook. It must hit our governments at their pocketbooks. So boycott, divestment, and sanctions, that movement is still on the table. And
Absolutely.
I hope that as 2024 emerges, and that this war tragically continues on, as it will, that more organizations will consider that and consider the deep history behind that. Just as you spoke, not just with the beginnings of the civil rights movement, from Rosa Parks' stance in '55, but also going way back to the '30s and '40s.
Absolutely.
With the Pullman Porter strike and the work of A. Philip Randolph. And the film that she speaks of is a film that I remember as a teenager watching, called 10,000 Black Men Named George. Of course, the main actor, the main role in that of A. Philip Randolph was played by the late Andre Braugher, who played that role to
Absolutely.
great effect, incredible effect, and reminded people of the movement the movement before the movement.
Absolutely.
And certainly, as you you suggest, A. Philip Randolph, that what was the beginnings of his rise as a civil rights leader, and then and that led to the '50s and '60s,
and the March on Washington.
Yes, and him becoming
Yes.
a major figure there.
Yes.
But I interestingly, I recently watched the film Rustin.
Oh, yes.
Inspired Rustin, and A. Philip Randolph is played by Chris Rock in that film. He's a different. A. Philip Randolph is a different person in the '60s than he was in the '30s, '40s.
Yes.
Unfortunately, try to keep Brother Rust down because of his sexuality. But again, that's played to great. But Andre Braugher, an incredible actor, and I hope that he will be remembered as one who played the dignity of Black people, and particularly of Black men. Whatever you saw him, whether it was his role as a police detective, and I believe
Yeah.
he played in the Kojak films.
Yes. And
Kojak films.
yeah. And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I'm sorry.
We're almost no, it's great. What you're saying is really important, and I want you to help us, Pastor Young. I think we should show that film next year about the Pullman Porters,
Yeah.
and connect it to the movement, because it's again, and that relates to our other guest, Ashley Lewis. We're going to get back with her because that is part of the history of labor, of organized labor in this country that we don't talk about enough. And the actor that Pastor Young speaking about, he just left us a few days ago and he was only 61.
Yeah.
So that tells us it's clear he didn't get the health care. Whatever took him out, he probably did not get the health care.
I believe it was lung cancer.
Yeah.
Stopped smoking in 2010 apparently. But
yeah, and we don't know the environmental reasons too that might have promoted that. Indeed. So and maybe also, Pastor Young, I'm going to invite you next year, which means in a few weeks, to consider coming back and talking more about the BDS movement and perhaps bring some other pastors in with us. But we're almost out of time. We have a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of you to give your closing statements for today about where we are in stopping this genocide. And as we move into a new year. Ashley Lewis, again, we're so proud to have you with us, calling from Detroit, from the United Auto Workers and the Women's Department. What are your final thoughts for us today as we look at continuing and expanding the movement for immediate ceasefire from the perspective of UAW?
So as I was listening to Pastor William, I immediately thought about when you talk about going backwards to look forward. The connection between labor and faith has been long, and it always bends towards justice, which is truly a play off of Martin Luther King's quote, which is the arc of the universe is long, and it always bends towards justice. And so when you talk about A. Philip Randolph, who came along the labor movement when they did not include Black people as part of the labor unions, but because they were divided along those color lines, right? They always try to segregate people based upon differences. And so what ended up happening was labor was forced to become more inclusive because it became a game of the next person. If it wasn't a Black man, then it became an Asian Pacific Islander, or it became those of Islamic faith, or it became those of Jewish faith. Everyone has been targeted. And so one of the beauties of the labor movement is understanding that those wheels that you see behind me, that we are all truly in this together. And in order for this movement to actually move forward, when we talk about a ceasefire, we have to connect people to the movement. We have to let people know that this isn't just a war, it's a war on women and children, because 70% of the dead are women and children. And I will not stop saying that number, because it allows people to understand who the true casualties are, who's really hurting from this situation. And today it's Israel and Palestine, but tomorrow it could be any one of us in any nation. And so this is a moral call, just like the letter from a Birmingham jail. I went back there, whether it's a call to clergy or a call to a worker or a call to an average citizen who is just trying to figure out, where do I stand and what can I do? How can I tap into this? And so this is a call in this moment for us to think about where do we stand as human beings? And where is the definition of justice going to end and begin? And where do we define it? Because if we don't define it in this moment, then we might be the next defining moment where we're calling on someone else to be an advocate for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley Lewis, I'm very proud of you. I know my mom, who's an ancestor, is also very proud of you. And we thank Elise Bryant for introducing you to us. And we hope to have you on again soon. And as we're talking about Dr. King, you both could come back for Dr. King's birthday. We'll certainly have a special discussion. And we will hope to be talking more about UAW and the role of labor in stopping this genocide. And Pastor William Young, again, we're so proud and thankful to have you on with us for this is our last show of 2023. Your final word in 1 minute.
Yes, just to say, Christian Zionism is rife in American society. It's rife in our government. It's rife in the Black community as well. And so the need is very great this season, especially moving into this new year. It's the need is very great to decolonize. That's the key, to decolonize our minds. Decolonize the minds of American people, to decolonize the church, and to decolonize the Black community, and to be, as my friend in Bethlehem, Dr. Mitri Raheb, often says, it's time for us to be peacemakers and not peace talkers.
Right on. Right on. And of course, we know the church has a lot to do. I often hear stories about people going back, which I'm not aware of all these details, but they talk about it. People going back hundreds or thousands of years, saying why Jews have a right to that land in Israel. So I can talk to you about that offline. Pastor Young, I've been shocked at the numbers of people who have said that to me. I was surprised. So you guys have a job to educate people on that issue. Again, we are very proud today to be wrapping up the year by talking about strategies for expanding the movement to stop this genocide. We need an immediate ceasefire. We're sick and tired and angry about our dollars used to kill babies, children, etc. So we know that we have to keep on fighting and keep on organizing, even though it is these so-called holidays. That's really what these holidays should be all about, organizing for peace in the world. We're thankful to have been joined by Pastor William Young of Covenant Baptist Church. Thanks to Reverend Hagler, and thanks to Leslie Cagan, and very much thank you to Ashley Lewis, representing the United Auto Workers, which over close to 1 million workers signed on for ceasefire now. So if UAW can do it, we know that other unions can do it. I want to thank our engineer today, Kalia. Thanks to Magic Mike, too. Thanks to everybody at WPFW, our small paid staff, for doing what you do each and every day. I want to thank people who helped Chuck Hicks with the toy drive last week. It was very successful. Thanks to Mari, who helps me every week. Thanks very much to you listeners who keep us here on the air. As you know, we don't take commercials from the warmongers who make the bombs and make the guns and make the pharmaceuticals, who sometimes aren't that good either. We're represented and here because of you, the people, and we thank you. Those of you who are able to make a donation to us, to WPFW during this season of giving, please do. We definitely need each and every penny that you can spare. And if you want to hear more about Gaza, tune in tonight, 7 p.m., Building Bridges. We'll be having another excellent hour talking about Gaza. And of course, tune in at 2 p.m. today to Dr. Watkins. And this Wednesday is the solstice. So do a little to take care of yourselves and shine a light within yourself and within the world. Many blessings. And we're going to go out with MC Abdul from Gaza.
Palestine's been occupied for decades, but a home for centuries. This land is generations of my family's memories. To plant, grow, and nurture the symbol of peace. The olive trees guaranteed that our people could eat. Living with limitations, pushed down by the occupation. Wanna see the pain? Take a look at the people's faces. Imagine being kicked out of the only house you ever known. We're praying for our souls while they're praying on our homes. It's not easy to put this into words. Looking at my baby sister, is this something she deserves? Growing up in a world where she's not treated the same, denied the right to live free because of where she came. They wanna occupy this land, won't let them occupy my mind. I stay occupied aside as I write about my life, because my only mission is to make people listen. This one's for Sheikh Jarrah, hoping it can make a difference, cause it's Same thing happened in 48. My grandparents got evicted. I'm forced to move away to the refugee camp in Gaza. No, nothing has changed. They can never return, so that's where I am today. Getting calls from cousins to see if I am alive. This year is not fireworks that are lighting the sky. We're trying to celebrate an Eid and keep the faith. I guess you could say it's how memories are made. Palestine.